Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the first episode of the Bottom Turtle Podcast. My name is Dr. Shannon Ray, and we are joined by our co-host, Oyani Onimiya. How you doing, Oyani?
I'm doing okay, Shannon. What up, guys? How you guys doing today?
There we are. So let's get started, guys. We're really happy you guys are joining us. But before we get started, we're just going to kind of give a little background about who we are. Like I said, my name is Shannon Ray. I am a theoretical physicist. I got a bachelor's degree in physics and mathematics from Wichita State University back in 2010. After that, I got a PhD in physics from Florida Atlantic University, where my graduate studies were on the energy of pure gravitational fields in general relativity using the Wang and Yao quasi-local energy, and a couple other computational geometry projects on computational Ricci flow for discrete manifolds of arbitrary dimension, and I wrote in something I call an isometric embedding algorithm, or the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm that embeds two-dimensional surfaces in the Euclidean 3 space. But anyway, I feel like I've gone on way too long.
Yes, you definitely have.
Yeah, so now I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow where I study quantum information. And so I'm a quantum information theorist as well. And most of my stuff is on quantum fidelity and channel and state discrimination. But I am just excited to have you guys here because I want to kind of communicate how I see reality given my experiences as a scientist, and just kind of use the language of mathematics to construct a language for conceptualizing reality using information theory as its basis. So that's the point of why we're here. So, Oyani, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thanks, Shannon, for that long intro.
Hey, man, I'm just saying how it feels. That's what wanted to come out, I guess.
But hey, guys. So my name is Oyani, as Shannon had introduced me earlier. I am a visual designer based in Maryland. I studied physics in Nigeria many years ago, before I moved to the U.S. And when I moved to the U.S., I worked in aviation for a couple of years. Started out in commercial aviation. And then I moved on to business aviation before finally branching out to start my own design studio. So like I said, I'm a visual designer. I mostly work with startups and other brands doing branding, user interface design, and logo work, and web design, and, just designing all kinds of stuff. I pretty much spend my day trying to communicate with people using colors and shapes and things like that. So, just having fun. I'm excited for you guys to be here. I'm excited for you guys to, listen into some of the conversations I have with my brother Shannon here. And this should be fun. I'll let him tell you guys a little bit about what our podcast is about.
Yeah. So like I said earlier in the introduction, the point of this podcast is to try to conceptualize reality using nothing but the idea of information. And so we want to just actually have conversations to kind of get used to using this language and kind of how we think of it and make arguments for why we use certain terms. And the reason why the reason why it's called the Bottom Turtle Podcast is it's in relation to the problem of infinite regression, which is a problem of trying to find the axiomatic foundational truth for someone's worldview from which all other truths can be derived. So if you have this worldview, this model of reality and how it works, then you always have to have a proposition that kind of explains a concept, but then you have to have another proposition to explain that concept. Yeah, and so you have this infinite regression where, because every concept depends on another concept, how do you get to this layer of objective truth, like from which
the bottom layer,
yeah. And so, this thing, the anecdote, there's this argument between this woman and this scientist about what the solar system and how it works. And this woman was disagreeing with the scientist, and she was saying that instead that the Earth was flat and it sat on the back of a turtle, and on the back of that turtle was another turtle. And so when trying to be pressed, like, well, what do these turtles stand on? And she said, it's turtles all the way down. Kind of just sweeping under the rug the fact that, how do you explain the Earth being on the back of a turtle?
I think that what is even interesting, though, is why was she even at this thing where this dude was speaking at?
You know,
I was
honestly,
thinking about that the other day. Like,
yeah,
I don't know how true this story is because why was she even there?
I have no clue. It could have been a public.
Yeah.
It could have been a public event. I think it was supposed to take place in like the 1920s. I mean, like I said, you can Google this. Like Google turtles all the way down, and you'll get like the
it's
whole
a pretty
story.
popular anecdote that has been remixed in all kinds of ways using rocks and all kinds of things over the years. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, so what we're doing here at the Bottom Turtle Podcast is instead of trying to find like the axiomatic foundational truths of reality, which we don't think is possible to do, we're trying to be practical and just ask, well, what's the extent that we can understand? You know, what's the extent that we can build our model of reality? And I think the furthest we can go, given our current state, is using information. And so that's why we're saying information is the bottom turtle. And we're basically going to try to make our argument for why we think information is the bottom turtle throughout this podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how we even arrived at that name because looking back now at the other name that we had chosen, the Information Minds and Realities podcast.
Yeah.
That sounded
super whack.
Don't sound too good.
Yeah. It was just basically a description of what was going to be the content.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a title. I mean, to be honest.
Yeah. So I like that we got to this bottom turtle spot. It's pretty interesting.
I was about to say, I remember when we actually came up with it, it was really smart that you said that we should sleep on it and really try to come up with something else. Because when we first came up with the Information Minds and Reality, we were pretty sure that's what it was going to be.
Sure that was what the name was going to be.
And you're like, no, let's just come ahead and think about it and give it one more chance. Because once we lock this in and we start making stuff for it,
and we're stuck with it. Yeah. So it really did make us kind of take a moment to really think about, why we're picking the name, what the name meant. And even we went as far as trying to figure out which one came first. Is it Minds, Information, and Reality?
Yeah.
That game
all the combinations.
We had like a whole list.
Yeah. But the thing is, I don't think I ever honestly told you how honestly I got to the bottom turtle thing. So the thing is when you suggested that, there was a part of me that was like, there was a part of my soul when you suggested that, like, well, you know what, to be honest, it's going to be Information, Minds, and Reality. Like, I'm really not taking his suggestion seriously. Because, like, it's like, how can we come up with something better? And so I was a slightly, I won't say resentful, but, I could feel a little bit of like, all right, well, we're just doing this just because. But I remember we were going to start meeting. And it was like maybe 20 minutes before the meeting, and I hadn't taken the time to think of anything because I was so sure what it was, and I didn't really take it seriously. But I thought to myself, you know what? I have 15 minutes before we start. Let me just spend that 15 minutes to really take him seriously. Yeah. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, as a physicist, I know people talk about the turtles all the way down anecdote and bottom turtle. I think that might work. And so I just suggested it to you. And when you first heard it, you were like, yeah.
I think of that. Yeah. I'm really glad that we took that extra one day to kind of really think about it. Because that was crucial in getting here. But hey, we're here now. So hey.
And the thing I like about it, the thing I like about it is whenever I tell my colleagues and friends who are scientists, they always like. I think Howard and Matt were immediately like, oh, the bottom turtle thing, like, with the turtles all the way down.
Turtles all the way down.
But I told Chris Tyson, and he at first he didn't get it. He's like, oh wait, is this a turtles all the way down thing? So it's like, yes, that's three out of three scientists / mathematicians who got it. So I think it's good enough.
We're programming right.
Yeah. And I remember we were going through all that discussion about like all the extra connotation that comes with it, because then you have a whole lore that goes with it. So people who are unfamiliar are looking it up, then they start, and it gives people actively
looking up to it. Yeah, because it is pretty interesting,
interacting with it,
because the podcast is not about turtles or
exactly.
Conservation and none of that.
It's about Information, Minds, and Reality.
It's literally about Information, Minds, and Reality.
Yeah. But and so I guess we have to start off by actually making our argument for why information is the bottom turtle.
It is the bottom turtle.
And to do that, we are going to go to a thing that almost any person who has been in a high school science class or a middle school science class or a college level class, like basic physics lab, and that is significant figures. We start off with a discussion about significant figures, which I have to say, when I was a kid and I was first introduced to this concept, I remember it being difficult to understand. Like, I was like, this does not make sense to me.
What is this? That's most of my memories about it was just, I was like, what is this thing?
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like looking back, like one thing I've noticed as working to become a physicist is that oftentimes when I come across something that doesn't make sense, and everyone else seems to just think it's like the basics of the basics and it makes sense. Like, I don't understand this. I just must be an idiot. Like, I just don't get it. And then later I go and I re-examine that concept. Like, no, fuck you. Significant figures is a profound, deep concept. That requires
don't act like this is some casual thing.
It's not something simple. I mean, it sounds simple, but when you really break it down, like, it has to do with whenever you have a measurement device, this device can only measure up to a certain level of precision. But what that means is that beyond that precision, you do not know what the answer is. Yeah. And so one thing that I was pointing out is, imagine someone has a stick and you ask them how long the stick is and they tell you it's 20 centimeters. When they tell you it's 20 centimeters, it's like, okay, what do you mean it's 20 centimeters? Do you mean it's exactly 20 centimeters? Do you mean that you had a measurement device that measured 20.000 into infinity to where it was just exactly on zero? You had all the subdivisions and it just hit zero every time? Or are you saying that you had a ruler that measured up to the nearest millimeter and you measured 20.0 and you said that's good enough, it's 20 centimeters?
Yeah. And
every digit beyond that zero, you actually have no clue what it is. And that's why in significant figures, if someone puts 20.0, that zero has information contained into it. It's telling you that you had a measurement device that can measure up to that precision, and it gave you a zero when you measured it.
Zero on it, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and what it's telling you is it's telling you the extent to which you know the answer to the question, how long the stick is. And this is why we are going to the Bottom Turtle podcast, because we are saying that let's be practical about this. Let's be scientists. If someone asks you the question, what is reality? Don't focus on that question. Focus on what is the extent? What is the certainty? What is the uncertainty associated with the answer? And so to get that, you kind of have to know, all right, well, let's sit and think about what is the extent to where I can know something about the nature of reality. And that's when you know that extent is up to the information you have stored on your physical body. Whatever memory you have stored, whatever interactions, experiences, whatever information you have, that is the extent to which you can say anything about what is reality. The nature of reality, what's true, and what the truth of it is. Yeah,
it is pretty interesting, because even just having conversations with you about significant figures and measuring like stuff. It just makes you start to really conceptualize how important information is and how important knowing the level of certainty of an answer is. Yeah. Kind of like how we talk. Funny thing though.
What up?
We talk about how polls do this to where when they give you 54% of people think that Donald Trump did not handle the coronavirus the right way or whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of websites don't typically put the percentage of correctness anymore.
Oh, the plus or minus?
The percentage of sentences, yeah, they don't put that anymore.
Yeah.
Because I did some research the other day and I tried to find different polling websites who actually displayed that. But it's one of those things where you actually had to go hunt for it.
Oh, really? Well, whenever I'm watching something like CNN, like whenever I see it, I come across like on CNN or something like that, and they usually say, oh, it's like 50 some odd percent plus or minus 2%. Like usually people will say the plus or minus.
I haven't seen it in recent times, man.
You should look for it. You should look and see whether or not they have the plus or minus up there. Because I know sometimes they do. And I wonder how many people ignore the plus or minus, because plus or minus, that without that part, you don't actually know what the meaning of the answer is.
This means nothing. These are just random numbers.
Yeah.
And it's just letting that fact just sink in as to how important that nugget of information is. Like you said, when someone says this is 20.0, there's a whole bunch of information in that zero that's just sitting there.
Yeah,
it's just
sitting there.
Emptiness. It's not just nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing about those, oftentimes kind of the way I think of things is, whenever there is a situation, there's some information that people can read in. So they read in some information and then they process it and then they read out the likely interpretation. So imagine someone makes a movie, and the movie, the person who made the movie wanted to write it about, the struggle of like the struggle of existence, and they want a little comedy and romance, and so they're trying to like capture something about the human nature. And so maybe that's what they're trying to communicate. But then when they put the movie out, everyone's like, this movie seems to be about, pirates or something like that. They get, like that. Yeah. So there's a communication there's something that's trying to be communicated. And then there is the space of how people interpret the thing that's trying to be communicated. And so what you can kind of get is you can get a distribution of how people interpret the thing that's trying to be communicated. And so this is basically any time that happens when you read in data and you try to interpret it, you're going to have a set of possible interpretations. And so when it comes to a lot of this, the way people lie to you is they'll take this set of interpretations and say it's a distribution that actually is like a solid curve, like a solid distribution where it's like a 30%, 40%. Like it's not like a 99% and, and a 1%. It's like there's like some 30%.
30% of people think that this is a pirate movie.
Yeah.
20% of them think it's a movie about romance.
Exactly. Yeah.
And 20% think it's a documentary. Yeah.
Yeah.
A decent enough,
yeah.
spread.
It's like a decent distribution. And so the thing about that is imagine if someone then took the set of possible outcomes in a distribution that's pretty broad like that, and they picked one of the outcomes and then they weighted it to where that was 99% suddenly. That's lying to you.
Yeah.
And that's what people do all the time. Like it's like that distribution tells you how much information, like you can actually take the probability distribution, take the negative times the probability distribution times the log of the probability distribution, and then like sum all of that up. That is computing entropy, and the entropy tells you how much information is contained in that distribution. And if that distribution is the actual accurate structure of what reality is, and someone takes one outcome of that distribution and then weighs that at 100%, they're just fucking lying to you.
Yeah.
Because that's not what the state of reality is. The state of reality is that distribution.
Distribution, yeah. And you need that information to almost, I don't even want to call it a side dish, but it's the only thing that makes the information make any sense.
Yeah.
It means nothing if you don't have that extra nugget attached to it.
Exactly. Because the thing about that is, if it is the case that the state only has so much information and someone is giving you an answer to where it makes it seem like it has there's way more certain than it is. If someone's trying to say it's way more certain than it is, and you actually know how much information is contained in distribution, that's how you can just go ahead and tell them that I don't believe what you're saying, and you can ignore it. Because that act of not giving you the level of certainty of your answer, or making up a certainty, or pretending as though the certainty is way more than it is, that's lying. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, it's something that is important when we even discuss information is, we need that extra information for information to even have any
meaning.
Actual value even. Yeah. It might mean something, but what's the value of this information you just gave me saying, 54% of the population supports Donald Trump's immigration policies. Okay, what is the upper and lower bounds of this? What are you telling me here?
Yeah. And it's one of those things where the distribution, like the set, so if you take the set of all scenarios, so all things you can read in, so the set of all possible scenarios, and then given the set of all possible scenarios, you then give an associated probability distribution of like a likely outcome, like a likely measurement outcome given those scenarios. If you take all of that, like those distributions of what you think the distribution looks like, your set of outcomes and the distribution you place on them, the set of all of those is your model. It's your model of reality. Yeah. And if someone is going through and they are taking a scenario, an inquiry, and they're giving you information where they take a distribution and they put all the distribution in one spot, and then they give you that distribution, and that distribution is going to interact with your model if you trust it. And then it's going to take your distribution and it's going to shift it to where it's going to be more like this thing is completely true as opposed to what could have been more likely, which is it's more of this broader distribution. And this is what people are doing when they are saying things with so much certainty that actually have far more nuance to it than it actually does, than they're actually saying, because the more nuance gives more uncertainty. And
more uncertainty, more options, more distributions. Like there's so much more that extra information brings into it.
Yeah.
And then someone intentionally just avoids giving you that information. You take it because you trust whatever sources it's coming from.
Yep.
Ingest it, and then your model of reality just gets to be completely worked by some random information that is absolutely not even correct.
Yeah. Because the thing is if you think that, like, if your model of reality thinks that this is the distribution, you are going to make decisions based on that distribution.
Yeah.
Because that's what you think the state is. Because if the state of reality is this particular distribution, then if you want to avoid a certain experience given that scenario, you're going to make a decision to have something else happen. Yeah. And so that's based on how you think the universe evolves, and that's based on your basically your model, this set of these inquiries. And yeah, I feel like this is one of the reasons why information is the bottom turtle, because you are this thing that's always stuck in this model of reality, as opposed to actually being able to know exactly what reality is. You just have a model that has some fidelity to the actual configuration of the universe. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's something that, you know, can easily be updated, manipulated, changed, warped, whatever it is. But, you know, this is pretty much the building blocks, I should say, of what is our reality as it is.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess it's interesting to note that, you know, I feel like when we discuss reality, we're not talking about, you know, the walls and the desks and whatever. I don't know because it's very easy to kind of have this idea of what reality means as the actual stuff that we can touch and feel, like, you know, the physical stuff, like your phones or whatever, when in actuality, reality really just is almost like a composite system of both the conceptual space and the physical space as they, you know, program each other, interact with each other.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually, honestly, it's to think of that kind of interaction between the conceptual space and the physical space. I think that's actually a description of the particle wave duality. I have to think about it more to be sure, but I think that, you know, you have the actual physical matter, and that physical matter has some settings associated with it. So in physics, whenever we talk about a physical system, we talk about its degrees of freedom. And so the degrees of freedom are these properties that the matter can have. So it has all these different properties, and they can have different settings. So it can be something like its position, it can be its momentum, it can be its angular momentum. You know, these are the different type of properties that, say, like a rock could have. Yeah. And so when you have all of these possible settings, then that's kind of like the information that's stored inside that object. But then if it interacts with another object, its settings change. And it seems almost as though that interaction of the settings, like when things interact, they exchange information. And so they change configuration during this interaction. But as one thing interacts, so if you have like a sequence of interactions, like you have object A interacts with object B, which changes object B's configuration. Then object B interacts with object C, which changed object C's configuration. But now C's configuration is correlated to A's configuration. So you end up getting so you end up getting like this domino effect, and you get this passage of information that's flowing. And so you kind of have the information about how the system behaves is both stored in the physical matter, like in the actual matter, but then it's also stored in the information about how they interact when they change from one state to another. And if you're working in the space of the change in configuration, or you're working where you're just saying you have all the actual settings of all of the matter, I feel like both of those would be accurate descriptions of the space you're trying to understand, and that's why they end up being like a duality. It's almost like in physics when we have we look at something like position and momentum. And we have these, like especially in quantum, we have these states called like Hilbert spaces. And these Hilbert spaces, they are the space where a quantum state lives. So like if it's a vector. So these Hilbert space can be like a vector of like these quantum states. And you can take this quantum state and you can represent the entire vector space using these basis vectors that are concepts of position or concepts of momentum. But both of them would span the space. And so both of them are equal representations of that space. And so what you can do is you can take the state and completely look at it from the perspective of position, or I can transform it and do it completely into perspective of momentum. And the thing about momentum is has to do with the rate of change of position, because momentum is mass times velocity, and velocity is a rate of change of position in time. And so you have momentum as being the rate of change, but you have the position as being the actual like physical position of all the points. But because in this Hilbert space you can span the space or represent the space in both position or momentum, then that means all information that can be understood about that space can be understood from either or perspective.
Or
and so, and so that's why they're kind of dual. And in physics, we have these two variables are called canonical variables, because these two variables, if you're doing like Hamiltonian mechanics, you have the Hamilton's equations, which tell you how position changes with time and how momentum changes with time. And they're canonical because they're supposed to have all the information. Like if you know the data about these two things, then you can know everything about the physical system. And so, I think that's where the duality lies. It's like the space of information is almost like is like interpreting it in terms of momentum, and the space of like looking at the physical settings, like the physical configuration, I think is something like looking at it from the perspective of position, something like that.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I think it's really interesting. Information in itself is such a nuanced topic that I think we struggled with finding a definition for it for the longest time.
Oh yeah.
And I think I think the most succinct version that you had said was what was it?
Correlation.
Information is a configuration that contains correlations between configurations.
Between configurations, yeah.
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 It might seem a little convoluted, but
yeah.
If you tell us about that.
Yeah, if you take some time to think about it, it seems it takes some time to really go into a deep explanation of it. Let me think.
Of it, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, because, there's a lot of ways to kind of conceptualize information. And one of the things that the way it's used in information theory is it has to do with there's information contained in a distribution. Like everything is a matter of like measurement outcomes. So in information theory, you have like some sort of experiment that someone's conducting. Say someone's flipping a coin. Like one of the most basic experiments. They're flipping a coin. They're trying to see if it lands heads or tails. And if the coin is a completely fair coin, then if you were to flip it and do like an infinite trial or a bunch of trials, like thousands of trials, then if this is a fair coin, then you should get equal amount of heads and equal amount of tails. And because of that, if you were to if you were like a scientist and you're like, all right, I'm going to see what type of coin this is. And you're going to flip the coin and then you're going to go, all right, heads, tails, heads, tails. And so you end up writing on this piece of paper, heads, tails, heads, tails. And what's written on that paper is correlated to the outcomes of that experiment.
Coin flip. Yeah.
So then what you end up getting is, after gathering all that data, you can create it into a distribution that tells you that you can use to try to predict what the outcome of that coin flip will be. But like I was saying, if the coin flip is 50-50, then you'll just get half heads, half tails.
Half tails.
And so what you'll find is that distribution actually has no information in it, because it's not helping you reduce the uncertainty of that measurement outcome. And so what you end up seeing is that if you have that the information contained in the data that I gathered with the heads and tails can construct a distribution, and if that distribution has the capacity to reduce the uncertainty of a measurement of that experiment, then that means that that distribution has correlations with that experiment, and you're using those correlations to reduce the uncertainty of the measurement outcome. And so this is why, you know, that stuff you're writing on a paper or whatever, that's going to be a configuration that you've rearranged. Like if you're writing on a piece of paper, you've rearranged the state of the paper and the lead to now contain the results of this experiment. And so those configurations that you're making on the piece of paper are now correlated to the actual physical system. And so now that's where you have a configuration that has correlations between other configurations.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the ways to explain it. And, you know, there's a whole spectrum of being able to determine how much information a system has. Like if you know the dimensions of the system, like in the case of the coin flip, you have 2 dimensions, heads and tails. And so if you know the dimension, then you know how much information can be contained in that system. So if you're using like a measure of entropy that uses a log base 2, like you use log base 2 to compute entropy, then that case there's 1 bit, like the most information that can be in that system is 1 bit. And so if you were to get the coin and it flipped heads every single time, then you would have this distribution that would go, all right, it's 100% heads, 0% tails. And so in that case, you would have a full 1 bit of information associated with that, given that distribution, which means that you'd have 0 uncertainty. And so you end up having 0 entropy, which is associated with having 0 uncertainty, which means that you have all the information that can be contained in this 2-level system. But as the distribution goes between 1 and 0, say it's 75-25, suddenly what you'll find is like, okay, well, I'm certain that it'll land heads 75% of the time. But you don't have the full 1 bit because some of that information has been contributed to uncertainty. And so entropy is kind of like, if I know the dimension of the system and I know the amount of information, then I know how much uncertainty there is. But if I know how much uncertainty there is, I know how much information there is. Yeah.
It's all interconnected, and it all depends on each other, and it all, you know, is related to the other.
Yeah, exactly. Much, yeah. And that's kind of why when we're saying at the beginning about giving your answer, someone has to give you the uncertainty or the certainty level, because if they give you the certainty level, then you know the uncertainty. If you know the uncertainty, then you know the certainty.
Yep.
And so you have to give that uncertainty or certainty with your answer. Otherwise, you could just be pretending as though the distribution is something different than it is.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that is provided that the certainty is also accurate. God knows, but
yeah, and
that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, and that's the thing is the more you do the experiment, then the more that you can be more confident that it'll give the answer you want. And that's actually why whenever you are doing, like, say you have a coin and you flip it, and you flip this coin 100 times, and 99 times, the first 99 times it gave you heads, right? And then on the 100th time it gave you tails. You are going to be shocked. And they actually, and if you look at Mark Wilde's book on quantum information, he has a section where he talks about the Shannon information, which Claude Shannon was a guy who originally came up with information theory. And he goes over it, and he actually talks about how Claude Shannon mentioned that the information had to do with the amount of surprise. And so in the scenario where on the 100th coin flip, you get tails, all of a sudden you just got a lot of information about the system because it gave you something different than you expected. Yeah.
Automatically, the uncertainty in the system now is now increased.
Yeah, the uncertainty in the system has now increased. Yep.
This is I don't know, man. It's really interesting. I think that as time goes on, as we go on with this podcast, people once we start to like use some of these concepts in our like conversations and things like that, more people will start to connect to how information is actually the bottom turtle. Like that is the building blocks. That's kind of how we like what we stack everything on is, and of course, how we stack everything on, and of course that is important. It's important enough for you to treat it with a lot of reverence, to where you're not trying to like spread false information, because you know the weight of that now. You know how that shapes our reality now when you're, putting false information out there, or you're putting incomplete information, or you are not taking the nuance of an information into consideration when you are interacting with it or anything like that. So
yeah, because the thing is the information people have stored determines their model, and their model determines how they react given a situation, which determines how they create, which means it determines how they make the universe evolve. And so what information you have stored and what information you're giving to other people, it's going to affect the reality that you find yourself in, because it'll change the way people create. People will create differently depending on what they think the model of reality is.
I just imagine, and this is something that just popped in my head, but I feel like it's so significant because if you remember when this whole thing with what was the name they called it? Oh, kids in cages. When this whole thing happened with the immigration stuff.
Oh yeah.
So from the onset of all this, in my mind, it was kids in cages. Trump put kids in cages. That was the narrative that was in my head for the longest time.
Yeah.
So probably a month or so ago was where, and whenever I go on Reddit and I read anything on Reddit, I don't care because I know Reddit typically leans left.
Yeah.
So whenever I interact with an article on Reddit, I always sort by controversial.
Okay.
Just to see what the other side, because I already know what the left is going to say.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, okay, what's the other side saying?
Yeah,
so, I'm just going, and someone mentioned out,
I think it's interesting you say that real quick, because I feel like a lot of the default narrative, if you just interact with media without actually seeking specific media, you're just going to interact with something that's more likely leaning left. Yeah.
So that's the reason why I always go in there, because they will post like some link to some website I haven't heard of, and then I have to go check it out and see what's on there.
Yeah.
And so someone had posted something about guys, Obama built these cages, and the person put the cages in quotes. I'm like, yeah, shut the fuck up. That's not true. So then, I went, did my research, and yes, that's exactly what happened.
Is it really?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you can inform me because I'm unaware. I remember.
But here's what's so funny about it. This is the most nefarious part of it.
Yeah.
At the time, it wasn't called cages.
Oh really?
This was just something that the left media decided to call cages now.
Yeah.
These shits have always been there. They called them detention centers then.
That's interesting, man.
Now, just imagine now I have inserted that nugget of information into your reality now.
Yeah. And if it's true, then people should be able to verify it. And I trust you as a person. I don't think that you're lying to me.
So now imagine if I was someone who was an artist or graphic designer like I am.
Yeah.
Okay.
Imagine and you are who you are. imagine you're Oyani Onimiya.
So imagine if I was someone who was like really passionate about, social change and something, and I heard this side of the story saying, hey, Trump put these cages here, and I go and I'm creating all kinds of like, oh, down Trump and the cages, blah, 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 blah. Like I am just creating and adding to information and reality off of like false bullshit.
Yeah.
And then it turns out, oh, wait a minute.
Obama.
That's not true.
Yeah. It's frightening. Yeah. It's frightening because it really does affect how people's state of mind, and because as we were saying, you are a mind trapped in a body.
Yeah.
Think of that body as a computer. It is a subspace of the universe that can be placed in different configurations. Just as I can go buy a MacBook Pro and Oyani can have one. As we start interacting with it, we start putting inputs into it. And those inputs are going to change the state of that computer. And it's going to change what information it has on it. It's going to change all that stuff. So, but that all of that has to actually be stored in its physical state, like its physical configuration. And so just as the computer is a subset of the universe that can be in some sort of configuration based off of its inputs, you too are a subset of the universe that's made up of the universe that can be put into different configurations. And so you as a mind are stuck inside the configuration of your physical system. And so you're stuck inside the model of your reality that is constructed based off the interactions that system has with its surroundings and how it processes data.
Information, yep.
I was going to say something else. I forgot what I was going to say. But,
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's a lot.
Anyway, yeah, I do. It happens once in a while. Just gotta.
But yeah, I think that was one of those moments where I took a step back to go, like, this is obviously nefarious. Like, people need to start to treat information with more reverence, because it shapes, because the moment I got that new information, my views on everything just completely changed.
Changing.
I dug deeper into it, and it was like, now granted, the nuance in there is that I think the intention at the time was to like only hold kids for like 72 hours or something.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a long-term hold. But I'm wondering to myself, like, nobody called it cages then, though.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you're saying is that what you're realizing is that you have to, is that it's not as though you're exonerating Trump and their administration from any wrongdoing in this situation. The situation's still really messed up. It's just a matter of, if I'm going to resonate with the feeling of rage and anger and feeling like part of someone is evil based off of a concept, I need to be sure that it's actually based on something, because I just want to have, and the more you actually chop it up and the more you look into the nuance, it's like having that ruler from earlier.
It's like having that extra nugget.
Yeah, it's like having that extra division in your ruler, and the more you do that, the higher resolution you have of your model. The higher resolution you have, the more configurations you can be placed in. The more configurations you can be placed in, the more basically the more processing power you have, because in computing, we all know that you want more bits, right? We know there are bits of data. And if you have a single bit, then that bit can be put in up or down, 0 or 1, whatever it is. And so these are the two configurations you have access to, 0 or 1. But if you have 2 bits, then you can have it in 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. And then if you have 3 bits, and so the more bits you have, the more configurations you have, the more processing power you have. And so the nuanced is the part of like getting a more accurate measurement device. But the thing is, you also want to know how to process the information so that the resulting configuration is as associated with truth as possible. Where truth is an understanding of, what the state of the universe is. And based off knowing that state, you can use that correlated information to try to predict the future state of the universe. And so truth is associated with configurations that have the capacity to reliably reduce the uncertainty of a measurement outcome, which is exactly what we were talking about earlier with that coin flip thing, where you end up writing down all these little zeros and ones from doing many experiences. Now you have this configuration that's trying to say something that's correlated to the physical system of the coin that you are flipping with. And that configuration, if it truly has real data about that physical system of the coin, it should be able to reduce the uncertainty to where if I do a sequence of events, the data says I should get 75% heads and 25% tails. You go and do it, and it gives you that answer. It reduces the uncertainty. It's correlated to that. It's true information. Yeah, that's how it has to work.
I think that's something that we're gonna have to probably spend a whole podcast talking about, is what really is the definition of truth, and what does truth mean in itself.
Oh, well, I already feel like I already know the answer to that. It is configurations that have the capacity to reduce the uncertainty of measurement outcomes reliably. Yeah. That's it. That's what it is. Because you're stuck in this model. You're kind of stuck looking at everything from these measurements. Because like I was saying before, is you are this physical system trapped in this body. But this body is basically an elaborate measurement device. And whenever you interact with your environment, that interaction has to result in a change in the configuration of the environment and the change in the configuration of your physical system. And so, that's just basically it.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think I like
Ghost in a Shell. How about that? I'll just say
Ghost in a Shell. That's where we are.
Yeah, that's where we are. That's where we're at. We're these conscious minds inside of these physical measurement devices,
sorting through the freedom soup.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Do you want to kind of introduce that?
Yeah. So I don't know. So basically, we had this thought experiment that we ruminated on for a while, and this was something that Shannon asked me a couple months ago, I guess. And it took me a while to even kind of really just grasp the significance of the question and what the answers really meant. But essentially, the question is, what would the universe look like if all the minds observing it were removed from it? And the first time I guess I won't speak for everybody. I guess the first time I heard this question, instinctively I'm picturing, the typical visuals that Hollywood has shown us for years, which is overgrown bushes and rusty cars and buildings in a state of disrepair. The world is pretty much ended and everything is crumbled. But
yeah, basically it's exactly the way it is now, but with
no humans in it.
But no people gone, no humans, no little creatures.
And but when you actually take a moment to really think on what the question means, you realize that in doing that, you're still observing the world from, a human mind. So, to take this even further, you have to then ask yourself a question like, what would an octopus's answer be if you asked him this exact same question?
Question, yeah, and it's basically a thought experiment that's meant to highlight the philosophical question of what it would be. I think one of the famous examples is, what would it be? What would it be? What would the experience of being a bat be? Like the experience of being a bat. What is that? I think that's like a famous one, but it's just a matter of trying to understand experience from the perspective of another creature. But because each one of these creatures have different bodies, they're different measurement devices, so they gather different data and they store different data and they access it differently. And so if all of your inquiries are based off of, like, all of your model is based off your inquiries, it has to be based on the questions you ask. And the questions you ask are basically they have to be associated with the configurations you can be placed in. And so different bodies are like different computers with different architectures, so they have different configurations they can be placed in based on those architectures. Therefore, they ask different questions. Therefore, their models are different. And so you end up having this issue of what would it be like to conceptualize like an octopus. But if you try to conceptualize the universe without any mind observing it, then you can kind of see that the model that you see is created by your body. Like it creates your reality. And you have to try to imagine what the universe looks like if there is no measurement device to even observe to sort through it and observe it.
And to be measured. I like to describe it, at least, when I finally took the time to really think about this question, it hit me that, this is almost like you take a box of crayons, you dump it in a blender, and, you pulse it a little bit, get it all nice and mixed up, and then you just dump that in a tray, and you're going through this, and this is how I can describe what reality is, what observing reality is without a mind. Is almost like you're going through this giant vat of broken up colored crayons, trying to sort it. We're not any different from giant sorting machines, just moving through the space, trying to make sense of it, trying to like find correlations between these things, and that's pretty much all we're doing.
Interacting with it. Yeah, we interact with it, and then based off of our interaction, its state changes, but our state changes. So one thing I kind of like to imagine that this like Oyani likes to use ground up crayons, but the way I view it, I call it a degree of freedom soup, because like I said earlier, in physics, whenever we talk about a physical system,
we're all about freedom.
Freedom, Mark, all day, man. We can talk about the virtues of freedom when it comes to computing and maximizing your degrees of freedom to increase computational capacity, because freedom is actually
pretty important.
It's actually pretty important. It's about how do you unleash the degrees of freedom associated in each individual mind, such that we can create a network that
we can utilize
as many degrees of freedom as possible.
Pretty much,
yeah. But besides that,
you're saying how it's a freedom soup.
Yeah, the degree of freedom soup. So essentially, a physical system has to do with its degrees of freedom. Its degrees of freedom are the properties of the matter. So these are basically how we describe, what configuration it's in. And so, given the set of all of its properties and you give it a settings, those settings are the configuration. And so in this degree of freedom soup, the way that I imagine this thing is static noise, but instead of it being just like black and white static noise that you see on a TV, add some color in there. Okay. So to take Oyani's crayons and slap those in there.
Like a digital version of my crayons, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. A digital, like a cloud of things. But instead of it being completely unorganized, unstructured, random noise, imagine there's like some structure in there. And then you are this thing, this little subset of this degree of freedom soup. And inside of you, you have all of these little, like you're moving through a bunch of configurations. Like your system's moving through a bunch of configurations. The degree of freedom soup is always changing through all of its little configurations. And then as you move through it, you are making measurements, and those measurements are constantly changing your configuration, but it's also changing the configuration of the thing around you, and you're just like moving through this static stuff, sorting it. And that is kind of the conceptualization, that the best conceptualization that we could come up with of what the universe would look like if there's no mind to observe it.
And I think that overall, like we say quite a bit, is that being able to understand that, the physical stuff is as important as the conceptual space is important, because at the end of the day, we're trying to get across the idea that what you actually see, like the things that you can touch or whatever, is not the extent of reality. That's not where realness stops. Like the conceptual space and how we interact with it and how it programs us or whatever, it's equally as important as, information storage or gathering device like your phone, or, the information you have about what a wall looks like or what a Tesla looks like. All of that is great.
Man, you really like Tesla, don't you?
I mean, it is the future. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, that's true. It's a bleak future. I remember you telling me about that one day. Like, that sounds like hell.
That is.
But anyway, we can talk about that more later. But no, the sorting through all of that stuff. Wait, no shit. God damn, I lost my train of thought. You were saying something. What were you saying again? I wanted to jump in earlier, but then I forgot.
You wanted to just shit on the fact that I said something about Tesla, and then...
No, I shouldn't have made that joke. I should have kept my eye on the prize and stayed focused on the thing I wanted to say, because I was want to follow a point you were making.
Yeah, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember what I was going to say. It had to do. Wait, no, let me say
it. Go ahead.
So it had. Okay, yeah, it had to do with the when you were saying the conceptual space as being as important to me. Because we are trapped in these bodies, that information is the extent. And so whenever you are giving any answer, if you're thinking about the actual physical configuration of the universe and the extent to which you can know it, that is how you're kind of like that extent thing is an acknowledgement of the conceptual space and the importance it plays, because you are trapped in the model, and your model is how you conceptualize. So you're since you're trapped in that thing, it kind of tells you where your certainty ends, sort of way. And so this is why these two things together, the physical configuration and kind of the or the physicalness, like the physical matter, and the model you're trapped in being treated as equal footing, is almost like acknowledging that second part of the question that you have to give to any answer, and that is the certainty associated with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
So I think it's something that we should all start to be more aware of. I certainly still think about it. I go through my day just trying to really be cognizant of the fact that I am moving through this space. It's programming me differently. It's changing my configuration. I'm changing it as well. And that level of awareness, it will perhaps help people, interact better, understand the value of communicating with people, understand the value of, getting more information, and how being able to, be willing enough to kind of observe your own configuration or your own settings and kind of like, tweak it and change it, as you go along is really important. And,
And it's really important, as you're saying, with communication. That's why it's really important to treat other people's data sincerely. Yeah. When someone else has a different interpretation of a situation, if you interact with it sincerely, then you'll interact with it not by believing it, but by genuinely saying, okay, what do you believe and why? And then you will try to go through the process of reasoned argument to see, okay, are their premise true? And is the logic sound? Because if the premise is true, valid, if the premise is true and the logic is valid, then they're making a sound argument. And if they're making a sound argument, then you might want to take their data and rearrange how your data is distributed, because they might have, Yeah. And then you give them your data as sincerely as possible. And then you guys can compare and contrast. And through that process, you can make a new configuration during that interaction. And that new configuration is now the probability distribution associated with the inquiry of the topic you were discussing. And now you guys can both possibly have a higher fidelity model of reality. And from that higher fidelity, you're better at predicting measurement outcomes. And from predicting measurement outcomes, you are being able to predict the result of something better.
The state of the universe.
You have a better chance of. Well, yeah, you can. Yes, and then you can know what you have to rearrange the universe in to get this resulting configuration, which then allows you to be able to create better.
Imagine so you can a world where everybody just did this.
Oh, that
is paradise.
It's the only path to utopia. Any other path of utopia that comes from force is not going to work. What you need to do is you need to convince people to play fair games. And so through these fair games, you can have fair communication. Through fair communication, you can increase the likelihood that when you're sharing data, that you're using the dynamics of that other person's perspective and your perspective to create a more, you're increasing the degree of freedom to create a more intricate, detailed model of reality so that we can divide up our model into smaller and smaller divisions, and those smaller divisions give us more freedom to create and
create stuff.
More flexible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely agree.
No.
Oh, no.
And
go ahead.
And wait, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess one of my parting thoughts for this episode would be that once you understand that the physical system that you are stuck in is the human configuration, it is the configuration of matter that is human, and it conceptualizes reality different than other configurations. It creates differently than other configurations. It, because you're trapped inside of it, every experience you've ever had or will have, and everything that you like about your life can only be done through that system. And so that system creates your reality in that sense. It is the creator of your reality, and it's the creator of all of your experiences that you ever will have. And so if there's anything about your experience, anything about your life that you value, that you enjoy, you have to thank the system, because it's the one that's giving you the opportunity to have that experience. So you need to value it more and make decisions and take your responsibility seriously to make decisions to put the system in a better place. Absolutely. Because if you love the system, because remember, every experience of joy, love, everything, you owe it to that system. And so from there, you can love the system. And if you love the system, then you want to make decisions so that its configuration remains stable. And so this is what it means to make responsible decisions for that system. But when you see that system is like the human configuration, if you love the human configuration of yourself, then you should love the human configuration you see in others. So and then from there,
that's where all of the value,
you're making decisions.
All of the value comes from.
So then you're making decisions to improve that person, but because you're making decisions to improve that person because you see the humanity inside of them, then that increases the chance of they making decisions for you, which then starts creating a fair situation, which then increases the capacity to share data to create. You see what I'm saying?
This level of interaction and just being able to understand the importance of sharing information, playing fair games, understanding people's point of view, accepting them. Yeah, like you said, this is the only path to utopia.
It's the only path to utopia, because if you try to use force, it's not gonna be fair, and they're gonna notice it's gonna be unfair. And unless you are using really dominant force, you have to quell any sort of insurrection. So yeah, is he still alive?
Well, who knows? That's the whole point.
He hasn't been in the news recently.
Who knows?
But yeah, if you try to use force, people are going to notice the force. So you have to try. So in other words, you have to try to, and this is kind of part of the podcast, is we want to create a language that when conceptualizing it from the perspective of information, it's always a question about what is the configuration and nature of the universe. Like you're always wondering what is the state it currently is in and what's its future state going to be. And so as long as you are making logically sound arguments from measurements that can be done on physical matter, you can convince other people of your model. You can have actual discussions about what's real and what's true. And so then you can start creating a shared model of reality, because you're always talking about things at the level that physicists talk about, and that is what are the settings of the degrees of freedom of the universe. And that's almost like a perspective that is independent of any individual perspective, which then lets you see the mutual information that everyone else has access to. So then if we're always working in this space of mutual information that we all have access to, then we can have more reliably trusted, fair interactions.
Each other. Yeah. I think this is an important thing that we can take away from this episode, I guess. But yeah,
man,
this was fun. You just gotta value yourself, value your physical body, value the experiences that it affords you to have.
Value the importance of information and the certainty with which people give answers. And value taking. Actually, one thing is I was gonna say like the value in the part of like subdividing, because this is actually, I'll just say this real quick. So if you have a system, like imagine, I don't know if, because we recorded some stuff earlier, so I don't remember if it's from this recording or the previous recording. But if you have a box, right? And you take that box and you can subdivide it into like 4 different boxes or squares. So say you have a square and you can subdivide that into 4 squares. So if when you had the first square, imagine that square could be black or white. Those are 2 different states it could be in. Then you chop it up and you have these 4 squares. And now it can be, black, 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 white, whatever. So you have all these different. And so given the size of that square, I can keep subdividing it into smaller and smaller and smaller squares.
Giving me more
and the more I
freedom
subdivide
to configure it.
Yeah, it gives you the more freedom to configure it, exactly. And so that level of processing and chopping things down into these higher resolution, that is like, if you were to come across a political subject and one side, and you just jumped on a bandwagon, one side says it's this and the other side says it's that, then you've essentially just subdivided that square into just 2 equal sizes. And so now you have these 2 options that you're going. That is an extremely low resolution model. Yep. That the resolution of that model is so low, it is useless. You have to keep subdividing that thing into smaller and smaller pieces, and that's what post-processing past your gut feeling and this gut loyalty, tribal loyalty is. It's actually breaking it down into smaller pieces so that you can have a more higher resolution model, so that you can have basically a more fine-tuned measurement device.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah.
So,
and and the last thing that we want to say to drive a certain point home is that if you think information is not important, then imagine this. That information is physical. This isn't just like some sort of stuff. It's actual physical. And that's because you can imagine that if someone told you a secret, there's a state of you before they tell you the secret and a state of you after they tell you the secret. After they tell you the secret, you can literally physically stand up, walk into another room and tell someone else that secret. And so you physically carried it. And that physical carrying is no different than if I wrote the secret on a piece of paper and handed it to you. And so in that instance, that when people are communicating to you and they're changing these models we're talking about, these distributions, that change in distribution is an actual physical change in your actual physical state. And so, you should really want to be aware of what things you're letting people tattoo on your insides, basically.
What things you're letting program you, how they're programming you, and, just, not to say that you should be oh my God, don't talk to me, but just be aware. Yeah, be aware.
Yeah, just be aware.
I think.
Yeah, and have some sort of principles.
Be aware
so that you can process the data.
And they kind of like when I read a news article, I'm like, okay, let me go see what the other side says about this. What is the nuance in this? Like,
Yeah.
That's just the only way we can navigate.
Let's subdivide it.
It's this, approaching, life, information, communication, and interaction with people from this perspective is going to actually become more and more relevant as time goes on, as, computers and AI starts to like have more of an impact in our lives, and, marketing and data companies trying to like, market us and push us into these bubbles. Being able to push yourself out of that bubble to go seek information to make sure that your version of reality has some level of actual, truth to it. Is
it like the ones and zeros from flipping that coin, where you actually looked at the results of the outcomes, and then from that you have a correlated distribution, or you just have some distribution that's full of nonsense and you just nothing to do with the physical system?
This has to be. This is a skill that just listen to this podcast now. You can't walk away and go, "Oh yeah, well I figured it out." No, you have to actually practice this. This is a skill you have to constantly practice. You read something, you hear something. Okay, let me take a moment. Let me what is the level of certainty of this information you're giving me?
Yeah.
At the very least, start from there.
Yeah,
So
man.
I think that was good.
That's a good point to stop. Yeah, there was another thing I was going to say, but
we'll keep doing that.
This could go on forever.
Yeah.
Part of this too is if you watch like Tristan Harris, he was on the Sam Harris podcast recently, and he was talking about if you watch The Social Dilemma, and in it they're talking about how the supercomputer is on the other side of all of your social media apps, controlling your behavior. And Tristan was asked by Sam how we defend ourselves against this, because Tristan's always talking about how what's happened is that we have these defense mechanisms as being like these biological creatures, and these computers are bypassing all of them, going deeper into our psychology to control us. So all of our defenses, go right past. But I think that when you look at things from the perspective of information, like what we're suggesting, then it makes you aware and focus on these things, which then can bolster that immune system. And what I think we need is a culture of people who value things like truth as defined in this podcast related to the reliability of reducing measurement outcomes, and knowing how to process information to get to truth, and then going around and sincerely sharing their truthful information as much as possible. Because I feel like going around and sharing truthful information in this sense is like an act of love, because you are trying to give someone else true data that they can then use in their model to better create their surroundings.
You're trying to preserve the system.
Put themselves.
That's all you're doing. You're just trying to preserve the
Yeah.
system we're all stuck in. Like, we're all in this shit. Like, if we break it, we're all in it, though.
Yeah, exactly.
All you're doing with trying to seek truth and spread truth is you're trying to preserve the system. It means you love the system. You care about it.
Because you now know the system has the data it needs to have a better model of reality, so that it can predict the future, so that it can make decisions to advance its position. Yeah. Basically. Yeah, and I think that's the last thing I wanted to say. All right, guys. That's the end of the first episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with us. But before we go, I'm going to go ahead and let Oyani do all the plugs for the social medias and all that. So go ahead and do the plugs, Oyani.
I love how you say plugs like it's something cool. But yeah, I'm going to do the plugs, guys. Like always,
just what it is.
Like always, if you agree or disagree, hit us up on the socials. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the Bottom Total Podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to tell your friends, and most definitely subscribe. You can catch new episodes every other week on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Stay turtling.
Stay turtling, my friends.